So besides, you don't really need me up here to tell you that things are rough out there and that they're only going to get rougher. Ask anyone who's been at the bargaining table in the last few years, and they can tell you. Everything that the labor movement has fought for and won in the last 60 years feels like it's up for grabs. Our health care, our pensions, good wages, really, you know, everything that we stand for is a movement. The folks who brought you the weekend, you could say, really haven't done a good job of protecting it. And the problems that we're facing really aren't that much of a mystery. I was trying to prepare for my talk last week, and I found a lot of insight in this incredibly pro-union publication. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called the Wall Street Journal. They summed up our situation pretty much like we would have in the pages of labor notes. It was an article some of you may have seen last week, and they focused on the fact that standards for union workers and non-union workers were kind of on a collision course. That, you know, I don't need to tell you this, it's not because CEOs are giving unorganized workers a free pass or they're raising their standards to match union workers. It's because they're pushing union workers down to non-union standards, really stressing the need that the lesson we would draw, that this is about organizing the unorganized. The article also focused a lot on concessions and the fact that concessions don't work. It talked about workers at American Airlines who took a 30% pay cut in 2003 to try to help keep their company out of bankruptcy. And what did they get? They're back at the bargaining table with the company with their hand out. This is something that we've seen in industry after industry and that we've been talking about, I'm proud to say, here at Labor Notes since our founding. The other thing that really came out, and it's something that Wendy mentioned at the very beginning, is that this is not about economic necessity, what's happening today for unions. It's about power. American Axle was mentioned in this same story that I drew from. And what was interesting about it was the fact that American Axle is a profitable company. It's doing very well, as anyone who's from American Axle here tonight can tell you. But that's not enough. Profits and profitability aren't enough. It's about power. It's about saying, if that company over there can get wages that are half of what I'm paying my union workers, I need to get it too. And fortunately, as Wendy said, workers at American Axle said no. They said, no, we're not doing that. And so they've been on strike for 7 weeks, 3,700 people in Michigan and upstate New York, idling 30 plants at GM, and putting 40,000 workers out on layoff. So I'm going to come back to that point because I think it's a very important one. But these things we're talking about here, they're not like the weather. These are not things that are just happening out there that we have no influence on or that we have no control over. It's true. Corporations have been running wild in the workplace and in the political arena since, you know, before I got my driver's license. But our movement hasn't really done itself any favors. Too often, we've moved away from and sort of lost sight of where we have the most power at work and where the union actually really means the most for average rank and file members, where it can make the most difference in people's lived lives as union members. The second thing that, that this story really highlights to me is that it also really draws out the fact that we as a movement have to really take on something we've been talking about in Labor Notes history since its founding, organizing the unorganized. Now there's a big debate in the labor movement, which you're going to hear a lot about here this weekend, about what that means. And one thing I want to stress about that is it's not about organizing people or organizing unions where members are props, or worse, where they're really an afterthought. At best, that kind of form of organizing is really building what Labor Notes founder has recently called shallow power. And I think that, you know, as we'll talk about more this weekend, that's not a solution to our problems. One thing that is, and that we're really going to talk a lot more about tonight, is about the question of democracy. In 1996, when John Sweeney was elected president of the AFL-CIO, a lot of people who were in our network, in our movement, said, we won. The debate's over. Problem solved. Didn't really turn out that way. The same thing we heard in 2005 with the formation of Change to Win. The debate's over. We've settled the question. We know what we need to do. And yet here we find ourselves in 2008, a short 3 years after the formation of a rival federation, the AFL-CIO, with the question of union democracy squarely on the table, as our brothers and sisters from the United Healthcare Workers West are here to attest. But this question of union democracy, this question of what is power and how does democracy relate to it, it's not about formal procedures, but it's really about members, people who are actually in the organizations that we're trying to build, having control, meaningful say in what they do, not just in their workplace, but in their unions. A lot of people say you don't need democracy to build power. You know, look at what happened under Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters. There was a strong leader. He really built power. Now, from where I stand, this is really about building something that's going to last. And what we see is that without democracy, any kind of power that you gain isn't going to last. The last point I wanted to make about this has to do with something that's also a heavy debate here this weekend and also in our labor movement today, which is about the question of how do we relate to corporations? How do we relate to our employers? And here in Labor Notes, we've drawn the conclusion over the years that partnerships are not a solution to organizing the unorganized. They're not a solution to rebuilding labor's power. Coming to our bosses from a position of weakness is not how we're going to rebuild this labor movement of ours. The other thing that really jumps out at you when you think about it is that from this position of weakness that we find ourselves in too often, we often turn to the electoral arena. It is, after all, 2008. There is a hotly contested Democratic primary on the offing there, and there's going to be a general election, which a lot of people are very excited about. And it's hard not to find the excitement around this election contagious, to really hope that after 8 years, the Bush administration will be gone into the dustbin of history, and that we'll be able to put an end to this immoral, crazy war that we've found ourselves in. But for a labor movement that's willing to spend $250 million on electoral activity, it seems like we've really put the cart before the horse. Because we know from our own history that politicians talk a good game on the campaign trail, and that change, real change, is about more than one candidate or one party. What we need is a movement that can hold elected officials' feet to the fire, and it won't happen without that. So how do we get there? It's not just about a fight. It's about what we're fighting for as well. It's bigger than one workplace, one union, one struggle. It's about building our capacity to change the world. At Labor Notes, we call this idea social movement unionism. And we think that really the best of what it's been in practice in this country is here in this room tonight. So pat yourselves on the back and shake hands with each other and learn what that looks like. Talk to each other, share stories, because this is really where not just it begins. This is not where it begins. Or I should say it's not where it ends, but it really is where it begins. We think that building that movement starts right here with you. It starts right here with this kind of connection that we're building in this room. We know there are no shortcuts. What we're fighting for is so complicated, but it's, at the same time, it's so simple. Building a movement's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So put on your track shoes and let's go make some trouble.